Bernice Castile harbored the straps of her faded satchel as she traversed the bustling corridors of Evergreen Valley High School in Sacramento, California. Her lean build drifted gingerly amongst the throngs of pupils, hazel eyes glued to the burnished tile ground. At barely 5'2", with tanned complexion and bulky spectacles which constantly slid down her nose bridge, she had mastered the skill of blending into the background during her 4 months at this academy. Her folks had relocated from a quaint village in Oregon after her mother secured employment at a neighborhood bakery, and adjusting to the immense student population of nearly 3,000 had turned out trickier than anticipated. The early sunlight poured through the expansive panes as Bernice proceeded toward her storage, situated in the feared senior section where upperclassmen assembled like commanding wolves. She maintained her gaze downward, intending to shun the notice of Harrison Ford and his posse. Harrison embodied everything Bernice didn't: towering, auburn-haired, center on the varsity basketball squad, and graced with the sort of effortless self-assurance that originated from never requiring to doubt your position in the world. His varsity jacket extended across broad shoulders, and his impeccably styled hair captured the light as he held court adjacent to the display cabinet. "Observe what crawled from beneath a rock." Harrison's voice echoed across the hallway, compelling several pupils to swivel and stare. His 2 dependable cronies, Kevin Riley and Ethan Baker, surrounded him like faithful hounds. Kevin, with his constant smirk and pricey sneakers, originated from affluent Sacramento heritage. Ethan, huskier and more hostile, served as Harrison's muscle when words proved inadequate. Bernice's digits clutched around her notebooks as she accelerated her gait, yet Harrison's lengthy strides readily diminished the gap. "Hey, I'm conversing with you, Ant," he shouted, employing the moniker that had shadowed her since her initial week. The hallway appeared to diminish in volume as other pupils detected the acquainted dynamic about to unfold. "Kindly, I simply require to attend lessons," Bernice murmured, her voice scarcely audible above the ambient noise. She fiddled with her numerical lock, digits trembling slightly, as Harrison positioned himself directly posterior to her, intimate enough that she could detect his aftershave. "What's the password?" Kevin interjected, his voice dripping with feigned politeness. "Come on, Ant. Utilize your etiquette." The chime sounded, signaling 5 minutes until the initial period, yet the trio exhibited no indications of shifting. Other pupils streamed around them like water around boulders, some stealing glances, yet none bold enough to intervene. Bernice had discerned that instructors seldom witnessed these instances, and when they did, they frequently disregarded them as conventional adolescent interactions. "I stated kindly," Bernice negotiated, ultimately unlocking her storage. She swiftly seized her physics textbook and slammed the metallic entryway shut, yet Harrison's hand shot outward to intercept it. "That's preferable," he uttered, with a grin that never reached his pupils. "See, you can be courteous when you attempt." He relinquished the storage, and Bernice hastened away, sensing the heaviness of dozens of gazes trailing her withdrawal. This blueprint replicated itself daily across diverse locations throughout Evergreen Valley High. In the dining area, Harrison would unintentionally bump into her tray, dispatching her carefully arranged repast, scattering across the ground. The immense expanse, with its extensive counters and mechanical illumination, transformed into a platform for public shaming as hundreds of pupils witnessed her scrambling to gather spilled sustenance while Harrison and his companions chuckled. The cleaning personnel would shake their heads empathetically, but furnish no substantial assistance beyond handing her supplementary paper towels. The archives, usually Bernice's haven, evolved into another battlefield when Harrison uncovered her habitual pattern of consuming lunch solo amidst the shelves. He would station himself at a proximate counter with his companions, conversing just loudly enough for her to overhear their brutal discourse concerning her visage, her inflection, her attire. The archivist, Mrs. Gable, seemed perpetually preoccupied by her computer display, never noticing the psychological combat transpiring merely feet distant. Even the studio, where Bernice devoted her spare periods laboring on drawings, wasn't secure. Harrison would swagger in with his girlfriend, Kimberly Reeves, a petite redhead who partook in the cruelty with enthusiastic giggles. They would linger over Bernice's shoulder, making audible remarks concerning her renderings, while she endeavored to concentrate on her labor. Kimberly's high-pitched cackle felt like fingernails on a blackboard as she highlighted perceived imperfections in Bernice's creative technique. What none of them realized was that Bernice's seemingly fragile digits harbored secrets. Back in Oregon, her grandfather had been a well-regarded trainer in traditional Korean martial arts, specifically centering on close-range combat maneuvers transferred down through epochs of his lineage. Every summer since she was 9, Bernice had practiced with him in his backyard dojo, acquiring not merely physical techniques, but the mental self-control that accompanied genuine martial arts mastery. A warrior's supreme weapon is endurance, her grandfather had educated her, his weather-beaten digits directing her through intricate protective actions. The loudest canine seldom possesses the strongest nibble, querida. Bide, observe, and when the instant arrives, act with exactitude. These moralities resonated in Bernice's psyche. Each instance, Harrison shoved her shoulder in the passageway, or Kevin knocked her books from her digits. She could have readily defended herself, could have exhibited techniques that would abandon her tormentors stunned and humiliated. But her grandfather had also taught her moderation, had underscored that genuine fortitude originated from choosing your engagements wisely. Retaliating would merely intensify the circumstance, potentially securing her suspension or expulsion from yet another academy. The badgering persisted to escalate as autumn advanced. Harrison appeared to construe her deficiency of reaction as frailty, propelling boundaries with amplifying audacity. During a particularly congested luncheon period, he approached her counter with a container of strawberry yogurt in hand. "Whoops," he spoke audibly, intentionally pouring the contents over her carefully assembled roll. The frigid fluid drenched through her luncheon sack and onto her lap, discoloring her cherished slacks. The dining area erupted in laughter as pupils extracted their gadgets to capture the instant. Bernice sat frozen, humiliation scorching in her cheeks as strawberry yogurt trickled onto the ground. "Sanitize your mess, Aunt," Ethan appended, tossing a handful of tissues at her feet. "Some of us are endeavoring to consume here." The trio of youths departed, high-fiving each other, while Bernice mechanically commenced sanitizing the sticky mess. A few pupils at proximate counters watched with a blend of sympathy and alleviation that they weren't the objective. No one furnished assistance, and by the period she had sanitized everything, luncheon period was nearly concluded. That twilight, Bernice sat in her petite chamber, gazing at a snapshot of her grandfather. Her parents had been laboring double rotations lately, oblivious of the daily torment their daughter encountered. Her mother would inquire concerning her day over hurried dinners, but Bernice had become adept at deflecting with generic replies concerning lessons and homework. She couldn't burden them with her quandaries when they were already stressed concerning invoices and adjusting to their novel existence in Sacramento. The genuine breaking threshold arrived 3 weeks later, on a crisp November morn, when the desert breeze carried the initial intimations of winter. Bernice had been traversing to her second period creative writing lesson when she noticed Kimberly Reeves, stationed adjacent to the fountain, appearing unusually apprehensive. Kimberly had never been particularly brutal independently, usually merely chuckling alongside Harrison's antics, but something in her posture implied predicament. "Bernice, pause," Kimberly called out, her voice uncharacteristically mild. "I require to communicate something to you." Bernice ceased, instantly dubious. Kimberly had never conversed with her directly prior, and her abrupt friendliness felt like a snare. "What is it?" "Harrison's conceiving something substantial for today," Kimberly whispered, glancing around anxiously. "He's been communicating concerning it all week. I surmise you should be extra vigilant." Before Bernice could retort, Kimberly hastened away, abandoning her station solo by the fountain with an amplifying sense of trepidation. The morn elapsed in a blur of anxious expectancy. Each instant she observed Harrison or his companions in the passageway, her cardiac rhythm amplified. During luncheon, she noticed them huddled collectively at their customary counter, sporadically glancing in her direction with expressions that rendered her abdomen churn. The assault arrived during the afternoon respite, in the congested quadrangle where pupils assembled between lessons. Bernice was stationed solo on a concrete bench, examining notes for her subsequent lesson when Harrison approached with his customary swagger. This instance, however, something was disparate. His expression harbored a brutal anticipation that rendered her epidermis crawl, and Kevin was openly filming with his gadget. "Hey everyone!" Harrison shouted audibly, his voice carrying across the quadrangle. "Come examine this out. The ant has been concealing something from us." Pupils commenced assembling around, detecting drama. Bernice endeavored to stand and depart, but Ethan obstructed her trajectory while Kevin persisted recording. Harrison stationed himself directly ahead of her, his grin predatory. "You realize what I overheard?" Harrison persisted, his voice audible enough for the amplifying congregation to overhear. "I overheard that ants like you don peculiar undergarments, desire to exhibit everyone." The phrases struck Bernice like a physical blow. She clutched her textbooks tighter, her knuckles transforming pale. "Abandon me solo," she spoke, her voice stronger than she sensed. "Oh, she articulates," Kevin chuckled, maintaining his gadget trained on her visage. "Come on, Ant. Don't be timorous, we're all acquaintances here." What transpired subsequent would be seared into Bernice's recollection eternally. Harrison reached into his pocket and extracted a petite pair of shears, the category employed in studio. The congregation gasped as he seized the hem of her plain black jeans and, before anyone could react, crafted a swift incision through the material. The sound of ripping fabric was succeeded by stunned quiet. Bernice glanced downward in horror as a lengthy strip of her jeans plummeted to the ground, abandoning her legs exposed. The congregation erupted in a blend of gasps, apprehensive laughter, and the clicking of gadget cameras. Harrison hoisted the strip of fabric like a trophy, grinning at the chaos he had generated. "Much preferable," he proclaimed to his audience. "Now everyone can observe what we're laboring with." The shaming was complete and devastating. Bernice stood frozen, her entire physique trembling with rage and embarrassment. Pupils persisted filming, some chuckling, others appearing uneasy, but accomplishing nothing to furnish assistance. She could overhear murmurs and snickers from every direction, could sense the heaviness of dozens of gazes on her exposed legs. But in that instant of complete degradation, something fundamental shifted inside Bernice. The subdued, obedient voice that had maintained her passive for months was abruptly drowned out by another voice. Her grandfather's voice, robust and lucid. "When diplomacy falters, querida, a warrior must act." The alteration was subtle initially. Bernice's trembling ceased. Her respiration transformed, controlled and consistent. She gradually glanced upward from her ruined jeans to encounter Harrison's triumphant gaze. What he observed there rendered his smirk falter slightly. Absent was the frightened, helpless expression he had cultivated accustomed to. In its stead was something frigid and calculating that rendered him seize an involuntary stride backward. You created an oversight. Bernice spoke quietly, her voice carrying lucidly in the abrupt quiet. The congregation leaned in, detecting that something had altered but not quite comprehending what. Harrison recuperated his composure and chuckled, but it sounded compelled. "Oh, really? And what are you intending to accomplish concerning it, Aunt? Scamper residence to Mommy?" Instead of retorting, Bernice gingerly positioned her textbooks downward on the bench. The plain action somehow felt laden with significance. She stood up gradually, her hazel eyes never abandoning Harrison's visage. The congregation pressed closer. Gadgets persisted recording, awaiting her subsequent maneuver. "I'm intending to educate you concerning respect," she spoke. Her voice persisted quiet, but carrying an authority that rendered several pupils in the congregation exchange apprehensive glances. Kevin chuckled nervously. "Dude, the aunt surmises she's robust now. This is acquiring beneficial." But Harrison was no longer chuckling. Something in Bernice's posture had altered, something that triggered a primitive alarm in his cerebrum. She stood differently now, balanced and prepared, no longer the hunched, protective posture of a casualty. Her digits dangled slack at her sides, but there was a tension in her muscles that implied coiled strength. "You desire to engage in diversions," Harrison spoke, endeavoring to recuperate control of the circumstance. "Excellent. Let's engage." He reached outward to seize her shoulder, the identical casual gesture he had employed to intimidate her countless instances prior. But this instance, Bernice was prepared. Her grandfather's training activated with muscle recollection exactitude. She stepped slightly to the flank, her left digit ascending to deflect his arm, while her right digit shot forward in a lightning swift strike to his solar plexus. The impact propelled the atmosphere from Harrison's lungs in a whoosh. He doubled over, gasping, his visage transforming crimson as he struggled to respire. The congregation erupted in stunned exclamations as their seemingly invincible leader was brought to his knees by a solitary blow from the girl they had dismissed as innocuous. "Harrison!" Kimberly shrieked, rushing forward, but Ethan restrained her backward, his own visage pale with shock. Kevin dropped his gadget and lunged at Bernice, but she was already shifting. Years of training with her grandfather had educated her to perceive assaults arriving before they completely cultivated. She sidestepped Kevin's untamed swing and seized his extended limb, employing his own impetus to dispatch him sprawling into the proximate waste container. The metallic container tipped over with a crash, spilling refuse across the concrete as Kevin landed arduous on his back. Ethan hesitated, glancing between his fallen companions and the lean girl who had just dismantled them with casual efficiency. "You crazy bitch," he snarled, pulling backward his fist for a haymaker punch. Bernice didn't even blink. She waited until he was committed to the assault, then stepped inside his range and propelled her elbow upward into his ribs. The blow was precise and devastating, targeting the sensitive nerve cluster her grandfather had educated her to discover. Ethan's pupils rolled backward as pain shot through his torso, and he crumpled to the ground, clutching his flank. The entire confrontation had consumed less than 30 seconds. Harrison was persisted on his knees, gasping for atmosphere. Kevin was struggling to extract himself from the overturned waste container, banana peels and sustenance wrappers clinging to his pricey attire. Ethan lay curled in a sphere, whimpering softly as he endeavored to process the pain in his ribs. The congregation stood in stunned quiet. Gadgets persisted recording, but no longer chuckling. Many pupils appeared shocked, some impressed, others slightly apprehensive. The dynamic they had accepted as natural ordnance, Harrison and his companions on summit, Bernice at the nadir, had been completely shattered in the span of half a minute. Bernice stood over Harrison, her respiration consistent and controlled. She could have pressed her advantage, could have delivered the category of devastating finishing maneuver that would have abandoned him unconscious or worse. Her grandfather had educated her techniques that could conclude an engagement permanently. but she also overheard his voice, reminding her concerning moderation, concerning the discrepancy between justice and vengeance. "You could have been amiable," she spoke quietly, her voice carrying in the absolute quiet of the quadrangle. "You could have merely abandoned me solo. Instead, you elected to humiliate me in front of everyone." Harrison ultimately negotiated to catch his breath adequate to glance upward at her. His carefully styled hair was disheveled, his varsity jacket wrinkled, his visage flushed with exertion and embarrassment. For the initial period in his existence, he was glancing upward at someone he had deemed beneath him. "I'm contrite," he wheezed, the phrases appearing to surprise him as much as everyone else. I didn't realize you could retaliate," Bernice concluded. "That's the quandary with bullies, Harrison. You mistake amiability for frailty. You surmise quiet signifies powerlessness. But some of us elect our engagements instead of initiating them." She knelt downward adjacent to him, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could overhear. "This concludes now. No more diversions, no more mishaps, no more shaming. If you or your companions approach adjacent to me again, I won't be so gentle subsequent period." Harrison nodded swiftly, his pupils expansive with a blend of apprehension and newfound respect. Around them, the congregation commenced to murmur as the shock wore off. Some pupils were already uploading videos to social media, the footage destined to spread throughout the academy within hours. Bernice stood up and traversed over to where Kevin was persisted, struggling with the waste container. She extended her digit to furnish him assistance upward, a gesture that surprised everyone, encompassing Kevin himself. After a moment's hesitation, he seized her digit and permitted her to tug him to his feet. "Sanitize yourself up," she spoke plainly, "and contemplate concerning the category of individual you desire to be." Kevin nodded mutely, brushing sustenance scraps from his shirt. The arrogance that had defined his personality for years appeared to have evaporated completely. He glanced around at the congregation of pupils, many of whom were staring at him, with expressions ranging from pity to disgust, and appeared to shrink into himself. Ethan was persisted on the ground, but he was no longer whimpering. He glanced upward at Bernice with something that might have been admiration. "Where did you acquire to retaliate like that?" he inquired, his voice hoarse. "My grandfather," Bernice replied plainly. "He educated me that fortitude isn't concerning harming individuals, it's concerning safeguarding yourself and others." She traversed backward to the bench where she had abandoned her textbooks, the congregation parting before her like the Red Sea. As she gathered her belongings, she noticed Kimberly stationed proximate, tears streaming down her visage. "I'm contrite," Kimberly whispered. "I should have accomplished more to halt them. I should have been braver." Bernice studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We all create choices, Kimberly. What matters is what we accomplish subsequent." The chime sounded, signaling the conclusion of respite, but nobody shifted. The quadrangle remained frozen in period. Everyone persisted processing what they had witnessed. Finally, Bernice picked up her textbooks and traversed toward the edifice, her torn jeans forgotten in the wake of everything that had transpired. As she traversed, she overheard footsteps posterior to her. She swiveled to observe a cluster of pupils trailing her, encompassing several who had never conversed with her prior. Amongst them was Zachary Woods, a subdued youth from her physics lesson who had always been amiable but never brave adequate to defend her when she was being badgered. "That was incredible," Zachary spoke, his voice full of awe. "I mean, the manner you handled them. I've never observed anything like it." Bernice grinned, the initial genuine grin she had worn in months. "My grandfather always spoke that bullies merely possess authority if you furnish it to them. Today, I elected to seize mine backward." Word of the confrontation spread through Evergreen Valley High like wildfire. By the conclusion of the day, everyone realized the narrative of how subdued Bernice Castile had single-handedly vanquished the Academy's most notorious bullies. The videos circulated on social media, exhibiting Harrison gasping for atmosphere, Kevin blanketed in refuse, and Ethan writhing on the ground, while the girl they had tormented stood calmly over them. The reaction was overwhelmingly affirmative. Pupils who had watched the badgering for months without intervening now arrived forward to articulate their sustenance. Instructors, abruptly cognizant of what had been transpiring beneath their noses, commenced paying closer awareness to the dynamics in their classrooms and passageways. Principal Thompson summoned Bernice to his office the subsequent morn, anticipating to address a discipline dilemma. Instead, he discovered himself confronting a poised, self-assured young woman who calmly explicated the months of badgering she had endured and her determination to ultimately defend herself. Security footage from the quadrangle sustained her account, and several pupils arrived forward as witnesses to the blueprint of bullying. "I don't condone violence," Principal Thompson spoke carefully, "but I comprehend that you were safeguarding yourself. However, I require to realize that this won't transpire again." "It won't," Bernice replied confidently, "as lengthy as no one compels me to defend myself again." Harrison, Kevin, and Ethan confronted suspension and were necessitated to attend counseling sessions concerning bullying and respect. The basketball coach, shocked by the conduct of his star center, instituted novel team policies concerning conduct and sportsmanship. Harrison's parents, mortified by their son's actions, grounded him for months and enrolled him in anger management lessons. The transformation in the Academy's social dynamics was remarkable. Pupils who had previously been objectives of bullying discovered novel self-assurance, inspired by Bernice's exemplar. The culture of subdued compliance that had permitted badgering to flourish commenced to crumble as more individuals spoke upward and intervened when they witnessed unfair treatment. Bernice discovered herself surrounded by novel acquaintances and admirers. Zachary Woods, in particular, became an intimate companion, drawn to her subdued strength and genuine amiability. Their friendship blossomed into something deeper as they discovered shared interests in art, books, and social justice. "You altered everything," Zachary communicated her one afternoon as they sat in the archives, laboring on a project collectively. "Not merely for yourself, but for everyone. Individuals aren't apprehensive to stand upward anymore." Bernice grinned, contemplating of her grandfather's lessons concerning ripple effects and the authority of individual action. Sometimes all it seizes is one individual refusing to be a casualty, but the genuine alteration arrives from everyone determining to be preferable. The archives, once a locale where she had concealed from her tormentors, had transformed into a gathering locale for pupils who shared her moralities of respect and amiability. Mrs. Gable, the archivist, had noticed the alteration and commented on how much more collaborative and supportive the student body had become. Even Kimberly Reeves approached Bernice a few weeks later, inquiring if they could converse. The redhead girl who had once chuckled at her shaming now appeared genuinely remorseful. "I realize I don't merit your absolution," Kimberly spoke, her voice shaking. "But I desire you to realize that I'm ashamed of how I acted. You didn't merit any of that." Bernice considered her phrases carefully. "We all create oversights, Kimberly. What matters is learning from them and accomplishing preferable." Kimberly nodded, tears in her pupils. "I've been contemplating concerning what you spoke, concerning the choices we create. I desire to be preferable. I desire to furnish assistance instead of harm." True to her phrase, Kimberly transformed into an advocate against bullying, employing her social influence to promote amiability and inclusion. She organized awareness campaigns and sustenance clusters for pupils who had encountered badgering. As the semester advanced, Bernice noticed that Harrison had genuinely altered. Absent was the arrogant swagger and brutal humor. He traversed the passageways quietly, no longer surrounded by his customary entourage. His grades improved as he concentrated on academics rather than social dominance. During a chance encounter in the passageway, he ceased and glanced at her with genuine respect. "I owe you an apology," he spoke quietly. "A genuine one. What I accomplished to you was incorrect, and I'm contrite. You possessed every right to defend yourself." Bernice studied his visage, glancing for indications of insincerity, but discovered none. "Apology accepted, Harrison. I hope you've learned something from all this." "I possess," he replied, "more than I surmised conceivable." The incident had educated everyone involved significant lessons concerning authority, respect, and the fortitude to stand upward for what's righteous. Bernice's willingness to defend herself had not only concluded her own torment, but had inspired affirmative alterations throughout the entire academy community. As she traversed through the passageways of Evergreen Valley High, no longer invisible but respected and valued, Bernice carried her grandfather's teachings with her. She had learned that genuine strength wasn't concerning defeating others, but concerning possessing the fortitude to stand upward for yourself and others when it mattered most. The subdued girl who had once endeavored to blend into the background had transformed into a leader, not through aggression or dominance, but through the plain act of refusing to be a casualty. Her narrative transformed into legend at Evergreen Valley High, a reminder that sometimes the most potent force in the world is one individual who determines they've had adequate and elects to retaliate with dignity, fortitude, and honor. Character count equals 25,313.